Right. So, welcome, Petals. So, this is part of my Alchemy of Her series that are supposed to be Instagram lives, but we had a little bit of a technical issue, and so I'm recording this separately, but this still will be part of the series. And so the intent of the series is to share the stories that supported us within our transformations, the stories of the work that really was the catalyst of our own work, of our own changes, and then the medicine that we are holding throughout our journey. And so my story with Bryony is that we have met what was it now? 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, 21, 22.
Yeah.
And I had been in a flavor of my life where I had done a lot of work in the underground, a lot of work in the shadows behind closed doors, and was really bringing in different sections of my life with breath work, working with the plants, energy healing. And then I stepped into one of Bryony's containers that was bringing in together the plants and the room. And that the power of that container for me was a massive transformation within my journey, as it really was the missing piece that was bringing all of those different corners, all of those different elements that I had been working on for years and was offering for years all together. And it really unlocked this ancient wisdom and a level of sovereignty and ancient remembering that I couldn't even comprehend before that. And it just brought everything back in together. So today I'm really excited to have Bryony with us and tell a little bit about her story.
Mm, thank you. It's always really nice to also have reflected the transformation that came through um the work we did together. And I was also thinking, wow, I can't believe it's now already like 5 years since you first stepped into womb alchemy. And obviously there's been many evolutions on both sides since then, especially with you stepping into your blooming and um, being more in the above the soil, as we were saying in our prequel. But yeah, I was actually reflecting very recently on what was the the origin point for me of what I can recall my memory of when I first began to connect essentially with the unseen and magic. And one of my earliest memories as a child was finding a dead bumblebee at the bottom of our garden and deciding to create a burial for this bumblebee. And I gathered my family and I like prepared this whole ceremony for this bumblebee. And I remember placing it in the soil and creating this feather headstone. And it was funny when um my family reminded me of it because they were like, I'm not sure that we've ever been to a funeral. Like they had no idea where I got this whole idea from of like creating this burial for this bumblebee. Um, and so it feels very significant on my journey of how we are born into this world and we are innately deeply connected to the earth and nature and the cycles and rhythms. And it's almost like we go through this process of forgetting,
Mm.
or a better way of putting it is being conditioned out of our own knowing and gnosis and intuition. And if those gifts aren't nurtured, if we didn't grow up in a home that kind of nurtured those gifts, and it wasn't as if my family like said that wasn't, something to do. They were totally happy if I made these rituals, but it wasn't exactly at the same time nurtured those gifts. They were much more, or they are much more kind of analytical minded, very atheist, don't believe in God or, anything beyond what this physical reality is. Maybe a slight inkling in my mum, but otherwise, that was the household I grew up in. And as I went through life, growing up in the city and in London, I always had this longing to just be outside all the time and to just be connected to nature and to really just immerse myself in the wild. Like I felt like a caged animal,
Mm.
basically. We have a joke actually with my husband, because I'm a bit of a wild animal sometimes. And just also like having a son as well, I think has brought that out in me even more. Um, but essentially, like jokes about me being like a domesticated savage. I saw this meme about Virgos being domesticated savage, but I asked him, what's the ratio? And at first he said, I say 60-40, like 60% savage, 40, and then I drop something on the floor. And he was like, no, definitely more like 70-80% savage, 20% domesticated. And I have to laugh because I think that's a lot how I grew up feeling,
Mm.
going to school, going, being in a system. And it was only really when I went to art school that I finally was like, my people, I have
Mm.
arrived with my people. Everyone is super, themselves, basically. Whereas, you grow up and often wow, you look back and how long were we just not authentic? Like, how long were we not, just trying to fit in, basically? And I struggled with this. I've always struggled with small talk. I struggled with any sense of blending in. And finally, I felt a deep sense of belonging once I arrived at my degree in art in Bristol. And that was a huge turning point for me, not only because I was now leading my own projects, my own art, but just creating from myself. I also began to study yoga at the same time. But also, what was really pivotal at that time was because I was creating art, and I was really encouraged by my tutors, like make art from your soul. And I was like, wow, no one's really asked me to just make something from my soul before. It's like, remember this date information of this,
Mm.
whatever they ask you to do in school. And I remember really them going on a journey of beginning to look inside. And at that time, yeah, I was starting to go to yoga classes much more. I did yoga since I was like 11 or 12. Because my mum still practices yoga even. And I remember just beginning to actually question a bit more who I was, like, why am I here? Like all these different things. And at the same time, I was, you know, yeah, traveling a lot in between. And, there was a pivotal moment in my final year of university where by essentially I decided to make my work about ritual. And one of the reasons being that I've always been a very go with the flow kind of being, even though I'm a Virgo sun, I think my Sag moon rules the roost
Mhm.
most of the time with how I lead my life. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring in this structure of ritual into my work. But it became so much more than that because I was like, what am I actually connected to? And I came back to that origin point, life cycles and nature, the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. And so I began to make my work about this, looking at seeds, looking at plants, looking at different forms in nature and painting these. And I remember asking my friend one day, like, what do you see? And she was like, well, I see a womb, or I see a vagina, or I see, she said, it's very like feminine to me. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I'm painting. It's my womb's story. Because backtracking slightly, when I was 14, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovaries. And yeah, it just kind of stayed with me, this point of like, why does my womb carry this story? But just went through my life as it was. And yeah, so when I began making this art, this whole shift began to happen in my body, in my psyche. I began to notice I was communicating um from this place when I was making my art. And that began to really transform me on a cellular level. um I realized, oh, there's a connection between my creativity in my womb. Like there's something happening here, but I didn't have a context for it because I hadn't been taught that. I was practicing yoga and kind of these things, but no one really was speaking to me about the more shamanic aspect of being. And in that whole process, I ended up, I don't feel to go too deeply into stories. I got pregnant. I had a pregnancy loss, and by choice, but for me, it was still a huge loss. It was not an easy decision. Um, but then that created such like a rupture of like feeling so much connection to, straight away, like I'm out,
Mm.
like I'm dissociated, like I can't connect anymore, like freaked out actually by the connection I was feeling. I didn't want to feel. But about a year or so later, I was still living in Bristol. I'd abandoned my art. Like that's something one thing in my life I do regret slightly is that I abandoned so many of my paintings. I think maybe my tutors took them and stuff. They really liked them, but I just said to my tutor, like, I just can't. He
Mm.
understood. They were very sensitive men, actually, very nice men who were running that course, which was really nice to have that masculine energy. Um, but essentially, yeah, a year later, I saw this advert for this course with this woman who I had a book from, but I hadn't read the book, but I just liked the cover, and it was Yoni Shakti by Uma Dinsmore Thule. And I remember going like to write the people, and I was like, oh, the course is already full. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to write them, and maybe a space comes up, and I can go. It's happening next week. I didn't even have the money. I was pretty broke after my degree. I was like, maybe I can still go. And
The
I remember,
Sagittarius rising again, the
yeah,
Sagittarius moon again, like ta ta ta, yeah, it'll be fine.
yeah, literally so many times in my life. And I was like, then I got a message back like saying, actually, a space has just come up, and we just feel called to offer it to you somehow. We just feel we want to offer it to you. And I was like, okay, great. And then I was like, now I need the money. So I messaged my dad and I said, like, because he knew the process I'd been in the past year. He's also quite sensitive at times. And yeah, so he gave me the money to attend the course and I went. And I remember I arrived and it was this circle of like 50 women in this like Buddhist temple.
Hmm.
And I remember all I really did for those 5 days that I was there, I just cried and cried. And I remember speaking to Uma, and this is like more than 10 years ago now, or nearly 10 years. And I remember speaking to Uma and her being like, asking her, like, what did that mean? Like sharing her my story. And she said, totally. That's exactly what it was. You were painting the language of the womb.
Hmm.
And and I was like, all I've done is cry. I don't know anything you said to me. Like I do. Like I remember it actually so clearly. It's like one of the trainings that the most went in. But all I was doing was just being with exactly what I was feeling. And she said, that's exactly it. That's also the work. Like there's no striving to get anywhere. There's no place really to be, but just to feel. And like there's all these practices and things. And it was so interesting because I'd come from this very kind of strict yoga mentality. That's where my Virgo showed up, really. I was in my yoga practice. And then to have someone just say to me, you can just be, like, just be. Like, what happens if you just let go some more? Is that where your power is? Is that what you're actually searching for? And that was like such a huge pivot point because at that point I thought I'm going to be like a yoga teacher. I'm going to work in some nice studio and then it was just like life was just like no. I just felt this big no, that's not your path. And I tried, after that to step into teaching more like hatha yoga, but my system I just couldn't do it. Um and so then I was on this whole journey basically of what is the womb? Why is she speaking to me? And what was that whole experience? What does that mean? And it was some years of traveling, getting lost more and more. I needed to get lost more, I think, but I was really beginning to search for the plants,
Mm.
the ceremonies, the this more connection to nature. Like I was like, I don't feel like my path is in a studio, though I like them. They're cozy and warm and safe. I was like, there's something else that I really need to tune in with that here. And yeah, essentially I some years later, I was like, I'm gonna travel to New Zealand. Like that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna travel to New Zealand. Because that place for me feels so connected to the nature and the elements. But all of a sudden, a friend was speaking to me and she said to me she was on her way to a shamanic initiation in Dorset. And I was like, wait, you're on a way to a shamanic initiation in Dorset? I
Endorsement?
was like,
Yeah.
Nepal. And I was like, interesting. And I was like, I've been searching all over the world for like, for the path. And you're telling me that I could just go down to Norse. But she didn't tell me what
2022
it
hours
was.
then. Yeah.
Um, but basically, I had this like pivot point moment. I was like, oh, there's a course, in this shamanic path starting next week. There's no spaces, it's sold out. But I'm just gonna write them and just see. Honestly, this happened multiple times in my life, the same situation. Um and in the end they wrote me again and were like, we feel like we need to offer you the space. But I was like, but if I take this space, then I'm not going to New Zealand.
Mm.
And I was like, bought my flight, I've got my visa, I've got a job lined up. But do I trust? What do
Mm.
I trust more? My gut feeling now, or the kind of the path I've planned out for myself? And of course, as I've usually done, I took the risk and took this path. And yeah, what I won't go too much into those trainings and things because they're very intimate. And I ended up following this path for 7 years,
Mm.
7 years of initiations and trainings. And again, what I could say was so powerful, not only what we did, but who I was with, the circle I was within, the
Mm.
women I met, and just being on the land and just being invited always to be and to connect to nature, to connect to my womb. And what really those trainings, those initiations invited, they were very intensive. These are like week long, like no phone, like, sometimes doing, quite like really like ceremonies that went on for days. But what really came to me was like, wow, what they're asking me to come back to is a remembering of my intuition,
Mm.
remembering of my own power, and remembering of my own gifts. And this was something that was coming to me in the day because I think there's so many certifications out there that we can do. And I had this whole experience when I was training to be like a yoga teacher that was like, okay, I'm going to do the certification, then I'm going to teach yoga. And I got to the end and I was like, I can't teach yoga.
Yeah.
It was a really humbling experience. I was like, wow, like I've done so many courses now, and it's not landing. And what I mean by that is that I realized when I did these trainings, I was like, oh, it has to come from somewhere really deep in the soul,
Mm.
whatever it is that we're doing. It has to come from our own, or at least for me, it has to come from my own inner alchemical process of transformation. It has to be really embodied for it to land. And that was when, you know, at the after about 5 or 6 years where of these trainings and all the other courses I was doing connecting to plants and flower essences and traveling still and meditation spaces, where I was like, okay, I have the courage now to do something. And a friend invited me to host a workshop at Psychedelic Society.
Mm.
And I was a bit like, And no, I don't know. Maybe I will, but I decided to do it. And then the lockdowns happened and I was like, great, I have an excuse to get out of it. I don't have to do it anymore. But then they were like, oh, you've had quite a few people sign up. Like, I think you should do it. And yeah, it was funny because I remember I in the first workshop I did with Womb Alchemy, there was one before that. But the first workshop I did of Womb Alchemy, about 40 or so women signed up, which like totally surprised me because I was not known anywhere. I wasn't really on Instagram or anything. Um, but I was just like, wow, all these people are coming here and
Mm.
trusting me to be in space with me. And I was so humbled. And again, I really put so much of the magic of what unfurled in that first session, because some of the women who were in that first session still come to, pilgrimage and retreats with me now. Um, was really also just the power of us being in circle and, just be giving space for people to be. Not only what I was necessarily guiding the practices, sometimes it almost felt irrelevant, but it was just the space created of being in that field of energy
Mm.
together, of allowing the intuition, allowing the body, allowing the womb, like all these different aspects to speak. And so, yeah, I remember I got to the end of that, I was like, phew, it's over. And then they're like, oh, well, a lot of people came and but you've had some nice reviews, so maybe you should do it again. And I was like, no.
You're like, oh, do I have to?
Yeah, do I have to? But then it came, and over time, I began to trust in myself, and yeah, I continued those initiations, and you know, it really felt like, and each time I spoke to my mentors, my teachers, I asked them like, should I be doing this? Like, am I qualified to do this? And they're like, if you're doing it and we feel you're doing it from your heart, then that's the most true thing you can do. When it
Mm.
really comes from the heart, then yeah, you'll fuck up sometimes. You'll make mistakes. Not everyone will resonate with you, and that's okay. But as long as you keep doing it from the heart, from the soul, then
Mm.
then it's the right path. And yeah, that's always stayed with me. That's always
Mm.
stayed with me. So yeah, here I am now.
Yeah, I think your journey like really resonates with me because I feel like I came from like I want to say like a similar path where I um I was very connected as a child, and then there was this big disconnection for me that happened through many different reasons, like trauma and like disconnect from my body. And I stayed within that phase of my life for a moment, and then when I stepped back into my body. It was in a very masculine way. So I was doing a lot of yogic practices. I was actually, yoga was a massive part of my life for many years. And I was following some quite, I want to say like strict teachings with that as well. So I was doing a lot of yoga, a lot of breath work. Then on the plant side, I was learning more like the botanical aspects of the plants. I was already engaging like with ritual, but also very much in a very Wicca organized rituals, where you have like
Mhm.
steps to follow and you have a
Yeah.
puja and you have, like so very connected to like that there being like a set flow. All of those practices, what they had in common was really like they had rules and a set flow and a specific way of practicing. And even like with the energy healing that I was doing, there's specific hand placements that need to happen in a specific order and specific symbols that needed to be used for particular elements, right?
Yeah.
So I remember really being like within like that flavor of my life for a long time. And actually when I connected to your taster, and it was with Ladies Mantle. And we connected the womb to the heart in this infinite loop. I just cried your whole session. I just remember like very vividly, like just spending like the pretty much the whole your whole taster session crying. And it was about really about being with what was. There wasn't, outside of the very gentle guidance that you were giving, it was really about more being into presence and being with what is and being and allowing ourselves to surrender as well and to listen. And I feel like that was such a different approach to all of the other, courses and certificates that I had done before. Even like I think like some of the things that I've done like with the crystals and with the plants, they've been like very structural. They've been like very, yes, organized. And the path of the womb definitely feels more into this dropping into presence, into allowing ourselves to surrender and to listen, really to move away from the active and the doing into the passive and to the listening. And then there is like so much wisdom that comes through and so much through truth and so much yeah, ancient remembering that just bit by bit comes online once we are in that connection and once we build that relationship, because I feel like it's very much like a relationship that we build over time and into bringing back like our awareness and our presence. And our devotion as well within our womb space. And so for me, it was a real pivotal moment in that way of like moving away from the very structured practices that I had into something that is a lot more flow and a lot more stillness.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think one of the biggest teachings I received in my journey is about, yeah, becoming the vessel, becoming the hollow bone. Because I think, structure and ritual and healing work and body work is so important in the beginning when
Mm,
we're beginning to tune, and that creates, a container and safety, um, as much as there can be safety, depending on the space. And so I think that can be really valuable. But the more we attune to ourselves and the more we're able to listen deeply, we're able to follow more what is alive, the current of aliveness,
mm,
which is, like the space we're speaking to, surrender and the mystery. Because I found it so funny when I did these trainings, and they never really would tell us what we were doing next. And they would always, mentors would always give us a little wink and like to be mischievous wink, or they'd be like, oh, if they did say, oh, we're going to be doing this, and suddenly we're like, oh, we're not doing that anymore, and they're like, that's just not what's true anymore.
mm,
And they were always very clear and affirmed, and that this is what's true now, and we're trusting that, rather than feeling we need to follow this prescribed order of things. um And so, yeah, I think this is something that's so valuable because we've been taught so much to doubt our knowing
mm,
and to doubt our own gnosis, our own gifts. And I think this is what I see as a reflection of so often what I have witnessed in women and people who've emerged from working with me or women in similar fields, is that there's an awakening of this gnosis.
mm,
And then very often you see like, oh, they're now holding this really beautiful circle, or they're making their art or their poetry. Like often it's quite an awakening of their people's creative gifts.
mm,
Because, especially as women, we're innately creative. Whether it's a child or our offerings, our service, or our paintings or our poetry, it's like our nature. We need to create. Um, and so, but often we can be hindered in that, in the sense that we can refrain from doing that because we're so afraid of getting it wrong, or um it not being, our voice not being worthy, or whatever the stories may be. um and so, really, that's something that brings me so much joy, when I essentially see women stepping into
Mm.
their creative power, their ability to create life on their terms and be daring enough to take the risks such as quitting their job or
Yeah. Good. Good.
or for I remember there's one womb mystery school course I did where pretty much every woman broke up with her partner. It was quite bizarre. I'm not sure if that was the
Yeah.
one you were in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
It was
everyone,
one of them.
obviously, but like
It was
I
one
was
of
like,
them.
what's happening?
Yeah.
Everyone's breaking up, but that speaks to the relational aspect of the womb, the relational aspect of the plants we were working with, the Venus plants, of how women were coming to their truth and like, actually, this isn't in alignment.
Mm.
And yeah, and that's something, being able to tap into our inner truth as well. Um, yeah, is another huge gift that I see from coming into alignment or attuning to the womb,
Mm.
and attuning to the body in this way and the felt sense essentially.
Because I think with you, I've done, I want to say I've done like 5 different journeys with you. Um, I mean, yes, I think my banker was starting to have shivers every time you were offering something. Luckily, then you got pregnant, so he had a break.
Yeah.
But so there was really like and in those, I want to say one common thread that I have seen in all of those journeys, there were, that was like your longer container or like the shorter journeys was really this invitation of reconnecting with our inner compass, but also really that process of untaming, of unleashing, of rewilding. And so really allowing ourselves the space to claim, to claim like the truth that we know lives within us. And I feel like yes, for a lot of people, that is then the catalyst of significant external change. That it is, yes, leaving a job, leaving a relationship, moving away, going traveling, birthing and offering, just those, yeah, this moment of that unleashing of that truth that has been residing deep down probably for a while, but that,
Mhm.
we've gone like this, like
Yeah.
steered away or like denied it due to maybe fear or conditioning or unworthiness or, all of those other elements that you mentioned. And that really coming back into our truth and coming back into our power, that process and then of freeing
Mm,
ourselves, of unleashing from like the external maybe ideas or expectations that may be lying around us, and that truth becoming more important than the consequences of acting upon that truth.
mm. That actually gives me shivers when you said that.
Mm. So now
Yeah.
obviously the times are away from like it's been like a long time since you first went, oh no, you really want me
Yeah.
to hold this.
Yeah.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about the work that you're holding at the moment?
Yeah. So I'm currently in the process of my new website is after 2 years of being in the making, is probably in the next month or so going to be ready. So there's going to be some new offerings on there. But what I have live at the moment is yeah, essentially a pilgrimage to the lands of southern France, Occitanie. And this will be the third pilgrimage that I'm leading there. But I've been traveling and part of pilgrimages there since 2019. And yeah, essentially, this is a place in itself that I would describe as an alchemical container. Actually, I even read in a book by a woman, Anais Sophia, I think her name is, and she, in her womb awakening, not womb awakening, maybe it's womb wisdom book.
Mm.
And I'd never read that book. I bought it years ago and a friend borrowed it and never gave it back. So I never read that book until like I was pregnant and it was in my friend's Red Temple space. But in this book, she essentially speaks about that whole region being like a womb and this alchemical um, place. And this largely comes from the dragon lines, the rose lines, the ley lines, essentially, the energy currents that move through here, and the highly magnetic frequency of the Pyrenees Mountains. And in particular, one mountain, the Bugaraj Mountain, which we journey to, the cave, and sometimes the peak as well, which is actually known as an upside down mountain. So we're essentially, when we enter this space, we're inviting in, powerful alchemical change to unfurl in our beings and our lives. And one of the reasons why I love bringing people here, because again, I've really seen the transformation that has impacted people from entering into this space, of entering into the darkness of the caves, into a area, a region, and a land that really like is pulsating with aliveness. Like it really, I really feel it's a place where the wild god still roams the forest. There's very, certain places in the world, but particularly in some of these regions of France, I've noticed there's so much dense forest still. And it's actually partly because of, the density of these wild spaces that the frequency has remained. And
Mm,
of course, there's a connection also to Mary Magdalene there, and to the Essenes and the Gnostics. And we visit many of these shrines as well. But the thing that I really noticed in my time living there and through my own journey of coming to live there was that there was magic long before the Magdalens arrived. The land itself is,
mm,
a temple, an earth temple, a frequency. And there's a reason why the Magdalens came here. It's not
mm,
by mistake, it wasn't, or it's not by coincidence, let's say, by chance. There was intentional landing in this region. And, there's this salty river that runs through the valley, deeply connected to, to the feminine mysteries, the salt being connected to Sophia and wisdom, meeting, the sweet waters
mm,
and the sacred union of these waters. Like everything is so like deeply encoded with magic and wisdom. Um, and yeah, I'm deeply excited to return once again. So we've called this journey the Return of the Druid Rose. The return actually
mm,
being the name of the first pilgrimage around the Druid Rose, what I collaborated with my friend Anna. And the Druid Rose for us really being this emblem of the uniting of these different paths, the mystical and the earth-based, the devotional and the shamanic, and how actually back when Mary Magdalene was there, we really feel and sense and can see that, that the paths that already existed, that the more Celtic, Druidic paths were embraced.
mm,
And we see it with the Cathars as well, who have many fortresses, and there's many interesting tales you can tune into about the Cathars. They're who my family is. My ancestors were Cathars and Huguenots from the Pyrenees. But essentially, they had these fortresses, but actually their churches were the trees and the earth and the shrines. So, they were practicing this way of love. And there's so much I could go into with their story, but what I feel to share is that there's such deep devotion embedded in this soil. And still now the people living there are very untamed,
yeah.
very untamed. Because they're the Occitanie really.
Mm,
It's slightly different to France. They had their own language, like much more closer to Catalan than to French. They have their music and all these things. There's this whole richness to the culture there, and so it really feels like a deep privilege to be able to bring people into that space and to share the intimacy that I have with this land. It's not only somewhere I visited, it's somewhere I've lived and seen
mm,
in winter and autumn and spring and summer. I've seen in all its different shades when it's really blooming and when it's really barren. And so, yeah, it's a real joy to bring people into this space. And
mm.
yeah,
Yeah. the importance of also witnessing a space throughout all of the different seasons, right?
Mm,
And to really like create that connection with the land as it is breathing, as it is growing, then as you know, as the leaves are falling, like really following like that complete thread of death and rebirth within
yeah.
one space as well, does create like that additional level of connection. I feel that we can't quite get when we are going back to a place every time at the same time of the year. You know, it's
Mhm.
like a frozen, like just one slice of a cake, you know, like a frozen image of one specific element. But when we are really with the land over the seasons, it's just weaving in those different, yeah, the different level of connection, this depth that I feel we can't quite achieve like otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, a lot of people who've come. I remember we had the first pilgrimage, we had like 30 degrees sunshine every day. And I'm like, wow, it must have been so blissful living here. And I was like, there were times when it snowed and our pipes froze and I carried 10 kilos of water up the hill on my back.
Yeah.
Or we had to chop wood for 3 hours so we could warm the house, or I think this is the power of seeing a place in different season. You get more of like a sense of what it really, is like to what really the different shades of the land are.
Mm.
And its wildness, because I think often, people who visit places only in the summer, there's often a lot of people and a bit more noise and all these things. And when you visit somewhere like that, like in the winter, I remember I would visit all these sites and they'd be completely empty. So no one's going here in winter,
And you were like,
cold and
yay,
it's wet.
this is
But I'm
my time.
like, it's
Yeah.
perfect. So yeah, you'd really get the different, and I would able to feel like I could hear the spaces sometimes more deeply. I don't know if I'd ever would run a pilgrimage in the absolute dead of winter.
I think you would need to have a very specific subgroup of people that you're inviting
Yeah.
in for that for that pilgrimage, you know, because the conditions will definitely be a play there. But it's just beautiful to
Yeah.
really have like that, that yeah, that seasonal connection with the land as well, and just that deep connection that you have to the land. It is something that I find personally like really important when we are choosing to go on a pilgrimage and when we are picking the person to lead us into a pilgrimage. It feels, yeah, for me, it always has felt like that deep importance that there is such a level of resonance and lived experience as well,
Mm,
rather than it being like a regular holiday destination to really have
yeah.
like that deeper woven connection with the land really, so that the medicine that can come through isn't diluted. Now that saying that, I
Mm,
obviously know that the space itself is, you know, the majority of the container will just unfold through the magic of just the power that the space is holding. But I do feel
mm.
it is important to have that discernment as well when we are choosing our guides into leading us into those really powerful spaces as well, where a lot of transformation can happen within our own inner landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of these places, like particularly at the Buggeridge Mountain, can be very strong experience for people going into the darkness. And I think to have this, you know, deeper intimacy with a space, it's more like ingrained in us. We're more
Mm.
we're more part of the land. We're not just like plonked on it. We're like it's part of us. And
Yes.
this comes, for me also through my blood, but also just through that being and going to these spaces and having many months of alchemical experiences and with these lands. So I really sort of have this deeper cellular understanding,
Yeah.
as opposed to like a kind of, oh, well, this place is a highly transformational place, that I've read about, or, well,
Yeah, that
however we make,
embodied experience. A
yeah,
really
some,
embodied experience rather than like the intellectual knowing and
yeah,
understanding and the knowledge of the historical path, but more like that, yeah, deeper embodied cellular level, really resonance and understanding and own remembering and own journey. as
Yeah.
well, with that space and with those spaces and with the energies that are present.
Yeah, completely. It's why, I've had people ask me if I'd run Egypt and certain other places.
Mm.
Um, like I said yes to places in Scotland and England that I spent time in. But yeah, a lot of the places I'm like, oh no, I need to I need to see it in winter or I need to like
Yeah.
spend a few months
Yeah.
to really feel yeah, like I and to feel that yes, also to feel that yes from the land. Like I really feel with particularly this region of France, there's been a huge yes from the land about being there and coming there and being of service to it. And that's something I always like to, yeah, feel
Mm.
and know before I agree to enter this relation and then bring people into that field. So, yeah, thank you
Mm.
for giving space for that. And
Thank you so much for joining me in this little conversation. It felt like just so important because um I feel like sometimes it's really powerful to revisit our own origin story and also to share it again with the world because I think a lot of people can see where we are now, and the medicine that we are holding now and the embodiment and frequency that we are holding now. But there's often been a big journey that has led us there. And it's not always that easy to trace those elements back. And so, really bringing this awareness also for ourselves into the path that we have walked, but also sharing this with our audiences of like, this is the thread that we started to follow and the major steps along the way. And I mean, you and me could probably have this conversation for another week because with
yeah,
each of those each of the threads have taken us on like side quests and many adventures like along the way, but just trying to find that way to, yeah, to explain, to share that unfolding that occurred to get us to where we are at today, felt really, really important.
Mm. Yes, resonating. Thank you.
Thank you very
So
much.
many side quests, but it's beautiful to bring it all into cohesion as well. That's also the Virgo, we like to bring it all together.
Yes. Thank you very much, Bryony.
Thank you. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.